A poor nurse gave her only doll to a sick girl, not knowing she was the daughter of a CEO, single dad. I do not want to sleep. What if I do not wake up? Emily's heart clenched as the tiny voice trembled beneath the blankets. The hospital room was dimly lit, the only sound the rhythmic beep of monitors and the soft December wind brushing against the windows. It was just past midnight, and the pediatric wing had settled into an uneasy quiet, except for room 412. Inside, a 6-year-old girl, pale, wide-eyed, and gripping the edge of the sheets like a lifeline, lay curled on her side, trying to hide her fear beneath a brave face. She was scheduled for open-heart surgery at dawn. Emily, 24, pulled the chair closer to the bed. Her blonde hair, tied back in a loose ponytail, was beginning to fray from hours of moving between patients. She reached out slowly, gently brushing a strand of hair away from the girl's tear-soaked cheek. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "you are so brave. I promise the doctors will take good care of you." The girl shook her head. What if I don't wake up and Mommy's not here? What if my heart just stops?" Emily swallowed hard. Her throat tightened at the familiar sting of helplessness. She had said those words once, too, long ago, alone in a hospital bed, only 5 years old when her mother's voice had been the last comfort she remembered before surgery. And then, her mother never came back. She looked down at her bag on the floor, then slowly reached inside. Her fingers hesitated, brushing over worn fabric, soft from years of holding. Then she lifted it out. It was a doll. Small, hand-stitched, with a faded pink dress and a single button eye. One ear had been re-sewn so many times it sat crooked. Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she brought it into view. "I had a doll like this when I was your age," she said gently. "Actually, this one." The girl turned her head, curious despite her fear. Emily sat beside her, laying the doll carefully into the child's hands. "My mom gave her to me the night before I had surgery. She told me, as long as I held her, I wouldn't be alone." And I wasn't. Not really. The little girl stared at the doll. "Is she magic?" Emily smiled, though her voice cracked. "Maybe not the kind of magic with wands, but she's been with me through everything. She's good at being brave when I'm not." A pause. The child's hands closed slowly around the soft fabric. "Can she stay with me tonight?" she whispered. Emily nodded. "She's yours now, just until you're strong enough to give her back." The girl clutched the doll to her chest, and for the first time that night, her breathing steadied. Her eyes fluttered shut, lashes damp against pale cheeks, and within minutes, sleep took her gently, like a wave receding from shore. Emily sat back, letting out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her eyes lingered on the small, fragile figure under the blankets, the doll's stitched smile peeking from beneath her arms. She did not notice the figure standing just beyond the glass wall of the room. Nicholas Crane stood frozen, his hand resting on the metal doorframe, watching through the narrow pane of glass. He had come straight from a late board meeting, expecting to find his daughter asleep. He had not expected to witness this. A nurse giving away her only comfort, a stranger singing softly to his child like she had known her forever. His chest tightened, unfamiliar and sharp. Nicholas was not a man known for sentiment. At 34, he had built an empire in tech, ran meetings like clockwork, and had long stopped expecting the world to surprise him. After losing his wife 3 years ago, his life had narrowed to 2 things: work and keeping his daughter alive. There was no space for tenderness, no room for small, aching moments like this. Yet here he was, unmoving, breath shallow, watching as the nurse with the tired eyes placed a blanket higher over his daughter's shoulders and gently kissed her forehead like a promise. He blinked and turned away. The hallway light flickered slightly. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another contract, another acquisition, but for once he ignored it. In room 412, Emily sat alone beside the sleeping girl, her fingers absent-mindedly tugging at the hem of her scrubs. The space beside her chest where the doll used to be felt empty, but her heart, oddly, did not. She looked up at the ceiling and whispered, almost to herself, "I hope she keeps her safe." Far down the corridor, Nicholas paused at the elevator. He did not know her name yet, but tonight something in him had shifted, because kindness that asks for nothing, especially from someone who has nothing left to give, is not easily forgotten, and he would remember that doll, that look, that girl, even if she never knew he was there. The morning after the surgery, the air in room 412 was quieter, more fragile. The storm of fear had passed, but in its place was the soft hum of uncertainty, the kind that lives in recovery wings, where strength is measured breath by breath. Emily stood at the foot of the bed, her chart in hand, eyes focused on the little girl who now slept more than she spoke. Tubes trailed gently from her arms, her cheeks still pale, but her chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. That alone was progress. By mid-morning, the child stirred. Emily was already there, crouched beside the bed with a small bowl of applesauce and a spoon that had a cartoon bear on the handle. "Hey, sunshine," she whispered. "Still with me?" The girl blinked slowly, then gave a faint nod. "Think you can try a bite?" Her lips trembled. "Only if you stay." Emily smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." She fed her slowly, patiently, wiping her mouth with the gentleness of someone who knew what it meant to be vulnerable and afraid. Between bites, she hummed softly, no lyrics, just a tune that filled the sterile room with something human. Later that afternoon, she brought in a thin paperback and crawled gently onto the edge of the bed. The child looked up, eyes wide. "Want to hear a story?" She nodded. "Only if you read it like it's a movie." Emily chuckled. "Deal." She read aloud with voices and pauses, exaggerating silly parts until the girl giggled softly, her first laugh since the night before surgery. When she finished the last page, the girl turned to Emily, eyes brighter now. "Do you think my heart's fixed now?" Emily placed a hand over hers. "I think your heart's braver than ever." Every hour she checked her vitals, adjusted the IV, brushed the girl's hair back from her forehead. When the child cried from pain, Emily didn't flinch. She simply sat beside her, held her hand, and said, "It's okay to cry. It just means you're still fighting." Outside the room, Nicholas came and went in silence. He spoke little to the staff, observed from behind glass. On the second evening, he stood outside, longer than usual, watching Emily tuck the child in with practiced care. Her movements weren't clinical. They were maternal, protective. She placed the faded doll carefully under the girl's arm again, smoothing its little dress with her thumb. The girl whispered something inaudible, and Emily leaned down to listen, nodding, brushing her cheek before standing. Nicholas's hands clenched in his coat pockets. He had hired nurses before, nannies, therapists, professionals paid well to care for his daughter while he worked, traveled, built an empire in his wife's absence, but none of them had ever been like her. They had never kneeled at his daughter's bedside just to make her laugh. They had never stayed past shift to hold a child's fear. And yet here was this young nurse, her shoes worn, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, giving more of herself than anyone he had ever paid. That night, in the break room, Emily sat alone with a paper cup of tea and a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in foil. Her shift was far from over. She unfolded the sandwich, looked at it, then rewrapped it again. She pulled her backpack closer and dug through it, retrieving a small lunchbox where she had tucked the rest of the staff leftovers from the children's ward kitchen, scraps of rice, a few steamed vegetables. Nicholas saw it from the hallway. He didn't know what moved him more, the way she worked tirelessly without recognition, or the way his daughter now called her Miss M, a nickname she'd made up because Emily was too long to say when sleepy. That same nickname had shown up in his daughter's drawings the next day, a stick figure with yellow hair and a pink triangle dress, holding hands with a little girl and a doll. He stared at it longer than he expected to. The days blurred. Emily stayed by the child's side each day and night, as if tethered to her healing. Nicholas kept watching. Emily never looked for an audience, never knew he was there. But he knew. He saw it all. And though his world was built on data, contracts, and measurable returns, for the first time in years, Nicholas Crane found himself trusting something unspoken, something as fragile as a thread, a connection formed not through blood, but through care. And it began with a doll, a whisper, and a woman who stayed. Nicholas lingered longer in the hospital now. It started with brief questions, polite, measured. A simple, "How is she doing today?" asked in the hallway or beside the nurse's station. But Emily, always attentive, always composed, responded with clarity and softness. "She ate a little more this morning," she said one day as they passed each other outside room 4012. "And she asked if I'd braid her hair later." "That's a good sign." Nicholas nodded, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. "Thank you," he said. He meant it. Later that week, while the child was napping, he approached the break room and found Emily wiping down a table, the sleeves of her pale blue scrubs pushed up. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and a faint coffee stain marked the front of her name tag. He hesitated at the door. "Emily?" She looked up. A brief surprise crossed her face, then a smile. "Mr. Crane," she greeted. He stepped inside, the quiet between them holding something unfamiliar, neither awkward nor formal, just real. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, "for everything you've done for my daughter. I've watched you with her. You've been remarkable." Emily smiled, but modestly. "She's a strong little girl." "Brave. I'm just glad I can be here for her." Nicholas studied her face for a moment. There was something in her eyes, warmth, yes, but also something heavier, something earned. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She nodded. "That doll, the one you gave her, it looked old. Was it yours?" Emily paused, then lowered herself slowly into a chair, inviting him with a gesture to do the same. "It was," she said, fingers lightly tracing a fold in the tablecloth. "My mom gave it to me when I was 5, the night before she died." Nicholas sat down across from her, silent. "I was scared, alone in a hospital bed," she continued, voice softer now. "She had cancer. She told me the doll would protect me when she couldn't. After she passed, I kept it with me, through every foster home, every hard night. It was the only thing I had left of her." Nicholas listened, hands resting quietly in his lap. Emily looked up at him. "But when your daughter was afraid, I knew that doll had done what it needed to for me, and maybe it could do the same for her." For a moment, Nicholas couldn't find the words. Then he said quietly, "She's being comforted the right way." Emily blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you." Their conversation might have ended there, but just then the small shuffle of slippered feet interrupted them. The little girl stood at the doorway, still groggy from sleep, dragging a soft blanket behind her. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on Emily. "Miss M," she said with a sleepy smile. Emily stood instantly. "Hey, sunshine, what's wrong?" The girl walked over, arms wide, and wrapped herself around Emily's waist in a tight hug. "I had a dream that you weren't here," she whispered. "But you are." Emily leaned down, hugging her back, her expression tender. Nicholas watched it unfold, not as a father, not as a CEO, but as a man witnessing something sacred. The child pulled back, looking up at her father, then back at Emily. "She is my best friend," she said proudly. "Forever." Emily smiled, blinking rapidly. "That's the best title I've ever had." Nicholas felt a weight in his chest, something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. This wasn't just care. This was love in its quietest, purest form. And for the first time in years, he understood how deeply it could matter. The pediatric ward was quiet that morning. A rare kind of quiet that came only after a long night of fevers, restless dreams, and hallway lights dimmed just enough to soften the sterile white of the walls. Emily walked into the nurse's break room, yawning behind the back of her hand. Her shift was just starting, and she had arrived early, as always. She headed for her locker, moving through the dim space with habitual ease, until something on the table caught her eye. She stopped. There, placed gently in the center of the table like it had been waiting for her, was a small bundle, wrapped in soft, cream-colored tissue paper, tied with a simple red ribbon. Beside it lay a note. She glanced around. The room was empty. With hesitant fingers, she untied the ribbon and pulled back the paper. Inside was a doll, small, hand-stitched, and unmistakably crafted with care. Her dress was pale pink, her button eyes gleamed gently, and her yarn hair had been braided neatly to one side. Emily's breath caught. It was not an exact replica, but it was so close. The shape, the proportions, even the slightly crooked smile. Someone had tried to mirror every detail of the old one, but this doll was new, clean, unworn by time, as if her past had been lovingly rewritten. She reached for the note. It was written in careful script, masculine and precise. "Thank you for bringing my daughter joy, and for reminding me what it looks like when someone gives from the heart. A grateful father." Emily stood motionless for a long moment, the doll resting in her hands. Her lips curled into a smile, gentle, surprised. There was warmth in her chest, not the kind born from flattery, but something quieter, recognition. She was seen, appreciated, not for what she achieved, but for what she gave. But as her eyes lingered on the doll's familiar button eyes and perfect stitching, something else welled within her, a pang that tugged at the edges of her heart. She lowered herself into a chair, holding the new doll close to her chest. It wasn't just a gift, it was a gesture, one that acknowledged her story, even if the giver didn't know the full depth of it. Her mind drifted back to the night her mother had handed her the original, Emily, small and frightened in a hospital bed, her mother pale and fading fast, whispering that the doll would always protect her. She had held on to that doll like a lifeline through foster homes and lost birthdays, through nights where no one tucked her in. That doll had absorbed her tears, her hopes, her childhood. And now she was gone, in someone else's arms, where she belonged, perhaps. But Emily's hand still felt the absence. She pressed the new doll gently against her heart. It was beautiful, thoughtful, and it meant more than the giver could possibly know. But it wasn't the same. A knock at the door startled her. Nicholas stood there, dressed in his usual dark coat, holding a coffee in one hand. His eyes swept the room, pausing on the doll. He stepped inside slowly. "I hope that was okay," he said, voice quieter than usual. "I asked someone to make it. I wasn't sure what to get." Emily nodded, looking up at him. "You remembered every detail." Nicholas stepped closer, stopping just beside the table. "I asked your patient," he said with a faint smile. "She described the old one with surgical precision, even the crooked ear." Emily chuckled softly, then her gaze dropped to the doll again. Nicholas hesitated. "You miss it?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "It was the last piece of my mother I had." Nicholas's expression softened. "I didn't mean to replace it," he said carefully. "You didn't," she replied quickly. "This is a new beginning. I just didn't expect to say goodbye so soon." He looked at her for a long moment. "You gave it up without hesitation." "I had to," she said simply. "She needed it more than I did." Nicholas nodded. "That's what made it a gift." They stood in silence, the kind that needed no filling. Then the door opened again, and a small voice called out, "Miss Emily!" The little girl barreled into the room, flannel pajamas and all, stopping when she saw the doll in Emily's hands. "Oh," she said, wide-eyed. "Is that her sister?" Emily grinned. "Maybe. Want to help me name her?" The child nodded, already climbing into her lap. Nicholas watched as the two heads, one golden, one dark, bent together over the new doll. And in that quiet, shared moment, he realized something. This woman, sitting barefoot in scrubs with a child in her arms and a second-hand doll in her lap, was the kind of wealth he had never known, and perhaps the kind he needed most. The spring sunlight streamed gently through the windows of room 412, casting soft lines across the floor where, a week earlier, the only light had come from machines and monitors. Now the beeping was gone, the IV removed, and the little girl sat upright in bed, her cheeks full of color, her eyes lively again. She had asked for pancakes that morning and eaten every bite. Emily stood beside her, adjusting the zipper on her small pink jacket. "You're almost ready to go," she said, brushing a hand through the girl's hair, "just waiting for the final paperwork." The girl smiled up at her. "I get to go home." Emily nodded, her heart tugging in places she hadn't prepared for. "I'll miss you," she added, softer now. The girl didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at the small suitcase sitting on the chair beside the bed. Then, quietly, she opened it. Tucked gently inside, between her pajamas and a picture book, was the faded, hand-stitched doll, the old one, the original. The girl picked it up, cradled it for a moment, then climbed down from the bed with purposeful steps. She walked over to Emily and looked up, holding the doll between them. "I want you to have her back," she said. Emily blinked. "Are you sure?" The child nodded. "I'm not sick anymore, and I'm not scared now. She helped me when I needed her, but I think she was yours first, and she missed you." Emily dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she accepted the doll. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for taking such good care of her." The little girl leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Emily's neck. "You're my real nurse, Mommy," she said softly, "and my best friend." Emily held her tightly, eyes stinging with tears. Behind them, unnoticed at first, Nicholas stood in the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He didn't move. He simply watched. Watched the way his daughter let go of something that had comforted her through pain and fear, not out of obligation, but because she knew it would bring someone else joy. He watched the way Emily received it, not like a returned possession but like a reunion, a piece of her past, brought back not with sorrow, but with love. He felt a lump rise in his throat. He had spent years believing that love had to be earned, that safety came through contracts and security systems, that healing was clinical. But this, what he witnessed in that room, was something else entirely. It was a giving that cost something, and it was more powerful than anything money had ever bought him. Emily stood slowly, brushing a tear from her cheek. She turned to find Nicholas watching her. For a long moment they said nothing. Then Nicholas stepped forward, his voice low. "That doll," he said, nodding toward her hands. "She's been through a lot." Emily looked down. "She's held me through the worst parts of my life," she said. "I didn't think I'd ever see her again." "And now?" he asked. Emily looked at him, her voice quiet but sure. "Now she's more than memory. She's part of a story that's still going." Nicholas nodded, his expression unreadable, but his eyes full of something unspoken, softness, admiration, perhaps even longing. He looked at his daughter, who now twirled near the window, pretending the sunbeams were ribbons. Then he looked back at Emily. "You gave her something I never could," he said, "and I won't forget it." Emily smiled. "She gave me something too." And in the stillness that followed, something shifted. Not grand, not loud, but certain. A returned doll, a full heart, and the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. It was nearly sunset when Emily stood in front of the Crane residence, a quiet home tucked away in a tree-lined neighborhood just outside the city. The house was modern but warm, not the glass fortress she imagined a CEO would live in, but a place that looked lived in, like someone had stopped running and decided to stay. She hesitated at the door, adjusting the hem of her dress. It wasn't new, she had borrowed it from a friend, but it was simple and soft, and she hoped it would be enough. When the door opened, Sophie barreled into view. "Miss Emily," she squealed, flinging her arms around Emily's waist. Emily laughed, bending down to hug her back. "You look like someone who's been waiting." "I set the table," Sophie announced proudly. "3 plates. Mommy says that's called manifesting." Nicholas appeared behind her, dressed casually in a navy sweater and rolled sleeves. He looked lighter somehow, less like the man who loomed behind glass walls and more like someone learning how to let go. "Come in," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. The inside of the house was warm, filled with the faint scent of herbs and roasted vegetables. The dining table was set near a window, bathed in golden light. 3 plates, as promised. A single candle flickered at the center, but it was what sat on Emily's chair that made her stop. A small, square box, wrapped simply with twine and a pressed flower tucked under the knot. Emily looked at Nicholas. He gestured gently. "Go ahead." She sat down and opened it slowly. Inside was a wooden hair clip, delicately carved into the shape of a doll. Its tiny face was etched with care, its arms outstretched as if always ready for a hug. The wood was sanded smooth, warm to the touch. Emily stared at it, lips parting in a silent gasp. "I had one just like this when I was little," she said, her voice hushed. "My mom made it for me before she got sick. It was the only thing I wore on picture days." Nicholas nodded. "I asked a friend of mine to recreate it. Sophie told me what it looked like. She remembered everything." Sophie beamed. "She said it made her feel brave. So I told Daddy that we should get her another one, in case she needs to feel brave again." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. Nicholas sat across from her, his gaze steady. "I didn't know how to thank you," he said, "for what you gave my daughter, for what you gave me, without even meaning to. But I thought, maybe this is a way to give a piece of it back. A new memory. With people who see it?" Emily ran her fingers over the carving, her hands trembling slightly. Sophie rested her chin on the table and said matter-of-factly, "Daddy says you should eat dinner with us every night, and I think so too." Emily looked up. Nicholas didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He simply reached across the table, offering his hand. She placed hers in his, tentatively at first, but then tightened her grip. It wasn't a declaration. There were no grand gestures, no perfect lines, but the message was clear. They shared a meal, just the 3 of them. Roasted chicken, buttery rolls, mismatched glasses, laughter that came more easily than any of them expected. At one point, Sophie leaned her head on Emily's arm and whispered, "I hope you stay forever." Emily kissed the top of her head and said, "Me too." Later, as she helped clear the plates, Nicholas stood beside her at the sink. "I don't want to rush anything," he said, "but I want you to know, this house, it feels different now." Emily looked at him, her heart full, her voice steady. "So does mine." And in the quiet clink of dishes and the smell of lemon soap and candle wax, in the shared glances that didn't need words, they both knew something had begun. Not suddenly, not loudly, but like all the best things, softly, naturally. Together. 1 year later, the mornings looked different. The house was small, just 3 bedrooms, and a sun-drenched kitchen that always smelled faintly of toast and lemon soap. But inside it carried the rhythm of laughter, footsteps, and the clinking of coffee mugs that belonged only to people who had learned how to stay. Emily stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Sophie sat at the table, swinging her legs and singing softly to herself between spoonfuls of cereal. Nicholas entered from the hallway, hair slightly tousled, carrying 3 folded napkins, and that same amused smirk that always showed up when Sophie wore mismatched socks. They weren't perfect mornings, but they were theirs. "Mommy, can I show her now?" Sophie asked suddenly, eyes lighting up. Emily turned from the stove, brow raised. "Show who what, sweetheart?" Sophie ran off and returned a moment later, clutching something carefully between both hands. It was the old doll, worn and faded, but clean and mended where time had frayed it. She carried it to Emily's bookshelf, the one in her and Nicholas's shared bedroom, and placed it gently between 2 framed photos, one of the three of them on the beach, and the other of Emily in her nurse's uniform on the day she'd been promoted to head nurse. "She lives here now," Sophie said proudly. "This is her house too. I gave her the best spot, right where the sun hits in the morning." Emily walked over, kneeling beside her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I think she likes it here," Sophie beamed. "She said it feels like home." Emily glanced at Nicholas, who stood quietly in the doorway, watching the moment with an expression that could only be described as full. Later that week, Emily came home from the hospital to find the house filled with the smell of cinnamon and something sweet baking. A banner, hand-painted, slightly crooked, hung over the living room window. "Happy birthday, Emily." There were no balloons, no crowd, no noise, just a table set for three, a carrot cake on the counter, and Nicholas nervously straightening the collar of his shirt. They ate dinner, Emily's favorite pasta, cooked by Nicholas with more confidence than precision, and Sophie insisted on lighting the candles twice because she wanted to sing both the regular and silly versions of Happy Birthday. Then, as the last slice of cake disappeared and Sophie ran off to change into her pajamas, Nicholas reached under the table and pulled out a small box. It was velvet, deep blue, fitted perfectly in the palm of his hand. Emily froze. He stood and walked slowly to her side, then knelt, not with spectacle, not with flair, but with quiet reverence. "I don't have the words to match everything you've given me," he said, voice steady but low, "but I've been thinking about that doll, about how you let her go, without knowing if she'd ever come back. You gave her to my daughter because she needed comfort, and somehow you gave her more than comfort. You gave her safety, family, love." Emily's eyes shimmered. Nicholas continued opening the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant. A single stone, carved in the shape of a doll, subtle but unmistakable. Delicate hands and a rounded head, arms open like an embrace, set in a thin gold band. "I know I can't return your past to you," he said, "but if you let me, I'd like to build a future where every dinner has 3 chairs, where the lights are always on for you, where no one is ever left behind." Emily covered her mouth with her hands, heart thudding, tears blurring the ring's delicate sparkle. Behind them, Sophie peeked around the corner, eyes wide, bouncing on her toes. "Mommy, say yes now!" Emily laughed, a sound caught between joy and disbelief. She looked at Nicholas. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Nicholas stood, slipping the ring onto her finger as Sophie rushed in, hugging both their legs. They stood there, wrapped in each other, under the glow of string lights and the scent of cinnamon, as the night deepened gently around them. Later, as Emily sat on the couch with Sophie curled against her, and Nicholas's arm draped behind them both, she looked at the doll on the shelf. Once it had been all she had. Now it was just one part of something much greater. A home. Not born from blood or promises or obligation, but from kindness. From a doll given without expectation. From a little girl's trust. From the man who had been watching through glass and one day decided to step inside. And in the soft hum of the night, in the flickering shadows of the room they built together, Emily finally understood what her mother had meant when she said that love, real love, makes you braver. She held Nicholas's hand and knew she had come home. Sometimes love does not arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it begins with a broken doll and a nurse who gave away the only thing she had left, just to calm a frightened little girl. And in doing so, she opened the door to a new family, a new beginning, and a love she never thought she deserved. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories, where every week we bring you true-to-life tales that heal, inspire, and remind us all that even the smallest act of kindness can change everything. Thank you for watching, and remember, love is always closer than you think.